Time to look at Melbourne and Brisbane this weekend, and they look poles apart weather-wise. Welcome to our Melbourne Pro, Aaron, and our Brisbane Pro, GK.
Well, welcome back to you, Mark. Good to have you back.
Thank you very much. Hopefully you've been flying in my absence. So looking forward to an interesting couple of meetings, both north and south this weekend. Aaron, you first. Caulfield looks weather affected.
Yeah, significantly. It's changed multiple times over the last sort of 12 to 18 hours, and I expect it changes again leading up to Saturday. It's been raining consistently since about 8 o'clock this morning. Expecting anywhere between 2 and 14 mils on day. Most of it's probably in the morning though, so we should be through the thick of it. But we've mentioned it a few times, this resurfaced deck, it can fall apart pretty quick when there's rain on day, and we saw that in the last meeting. The true rail was obviously the last meeting, but there was a massive advantage, which we'll speak about in the latter part of the card, towards being up and in. But we were coming back to fresh ground there, so moving the rail out 4 metres, this was affected a couple of weeks ago, so it's going to be a very interesting pattern that we should be able to establish by the time we get to the legs that we're going to cover in the preview.
Okay. So are you anxious about this likely scenario?
Very. I haven't had any early bets at the moment. I've mentioned this in the past as well. Caulfield, very different to Flemington. Flemington, you can call the bias from the start and it's pretty consistent. Caulfield, there's a distinct change typically at the halfway mark, and once that kicks in, that's the bias you're dealing with for the rest of the day, and it usually kicks in at the halfway mark. So, we'll do our best to cover these races, but a lot is likely to change on day.
Right. Well, Glenn, GK, you'll be forgiven for keeping your own counsel as far as Caulfield is concerned. We're covering the legs of the quaddie at Caulfield, and that kicks off with race 6 because it's a 9-race card. It's an open 3-year-old over 1,200 metres, and Prinzero is 550, Wallenda 550, Bossy Nick 6, Bricard 750, Piastri 9, couple at 11, Valois, which was also an acceptor for Sydney but looks likely to run at Melbourne, and Harry got Styles. I couldn't find much speed here. I had Bricard leading. Is that how you see it, Aaron, or have you got something else?
Patchouli Dream, Valois, Steel City, Prinzero, Bricard maybe. I mean, it's at OSL their last start. They didn't break records, but it could go forward. Yeah, I mean, I think we took all the favourites on last week and got them beat, and I'm looking to get at least 2 beat this week, and this is one of them. It was Bossy Nick. I'm very surprised to see it 550 this firm in the market. I think it might be done for this prep. It's had a couple of tough runs, especially that 2 back at Caulfield when it was forced, sort of 4 wide. Most of the trip just fell in behind or fell in front of Enna's Dream. That horse came out and flopped its next start. If you go back to 3 back at Mornington, it just beat Valois a lip. Valois was first up, carrying more weight than it. It's got significant weight relief over that horse, and Valois double figures might be one that goes forward and sits on speed. And then last start, it just looked a bit tired to me. Prinzero and Wallenda both finished in front of it. They come through that right to party race. Prinzero, I was surprised to see it $26. We didn't mind it. Second up behind the Black Cloud, and sort of the yard comments were probably 1 away from top. And that's basically how it eventuated. It loomed up like it might challenge the Black Cloud or the Black Storm. And that horse was just too good to be fair. But that horse, Prinzero, did peak on its run. Looked like it might be at its best the next start, which I thought was really good. Right to party, fair, beat it fair and square. But I thought the way it was travelling sort of suggested it's probably got one more at that level, and maybe coming back around a bend from this gate might suit. And then if you look at that,
what do you put its previous Caulfield? Like I see, it's got 2 Caulfield failures there in its CV. What are you saying about that?
Well, one of them was before it went for a spell in the Gothic Stakes when it got beat Arkansas Kid. I think it was 8th, 9th, or might have been 9th or 9th, but it was only been 3.5 lengths. and it was a failure before it went for a spell. I mean, it's a lightly raced horse. And then if you look at it, you obviously have to have a second look at Willenda as well, which, I mean, speaking about going around a bend, probably hidden its first couple, really good its last two, but I think the big positives for it are obviously shin sticks and it gets back around a bend. If you go back to last prep, I think both runs were in Sydney. Yeah, they were. One was coming second to Caballas. Caballas is like $11 in the Moya Stakes, which is just a ridiculous price, but a reference point that is a pretty strong form. And it actually beat the Black Cloud before it went for a spell. So if wide lanes are your friend, you've got to look closely at that. But outside of that, I think Ricard is way too firm. It's at OSL. They didn't go out quick. One of the things you look for from the out wide is separation of field. You didn't get that second to eighth. There's about a length and a half covering them. And then, Piastri and Valois have some chance. Piastri was caught in the bad lanes there last start. You couldn't loop. You had to be up and in. And then obviously referenced Valois with the weight relief.
Looks an opaque race, but that leads into a race where we've got a standout favourite, recommendation at $1.50. Mrs. Chrissy, $6. Marble 9 hits the others at $11. I've got Semyon coming across. Does the favourite hold it out here, Aaron?
Well, we got Aggressive Shin last start. Aggressive Shin's back, and he's probably the best jock in Australia at the moment when he's on. I think GK, you actually referenced in that last start, Party for Two was a really quick Queensland horse, and you were going to be surprised if it got across, given that it drew inside of it. It did take about 300 metres, but he doesn't have to deal with that here. Marble 9, which has drawn one, always sits on speed, but it's not an out-and-out leader. I'm not sure Semyon actually gets across from this gate. Look, you can mark this horse anywhere between $1.40 and $1.90. The ticks in its favour is obviously what I just mentioned there. It doesn't have an ultra quick one inside it to come across it. And it's not for me so much about the margins last start and how dramatic it was. It was how much improvement it had from the yard. You saw a really notable drift on it late, and I'd say that was the yard watchers pushing it out, saying it's got a bit of improvement to come. The knocks are sort of the fuzziness about some of the ratings that have come out of the last few races on that card. And I just mentioned Marble 9. Marble 9 raced in, was it race 7 prior to it? And that was the first real indication about how massive the up and in bias was. Marble 9 raced just tucked behind the speed, but it was on the rails the whole run. It wasn't travelling on the bend, and somehow it got up to win. Recommendation comes out, improvement to come, crosses, puts a hole in them by 7 lengths. And then Astero, Shin, in the last race, I don't think Astero's ever led in its life. Goes straight to the front, in front of Reinberg, and makes the rest look like they can't go. So it's hard to quantify how big the bias was. I tend to think it was probably 5 lengths by that stage of the day. Looking at outside of it, though, I mean, look, Mrs. Chrissy, you can say it was in an unwinnable position and it was trying to weave through them, but it's also getting deep into the prep, and you lose some of the early tactical speed at this stage of the prep. I'm not sure where it settles. Mornington Glory can improve, probably wants it a little bit firmer again, doesn't want the rain on day. It's really hard to go outside a recommendation.
Yeah, but can you see a situation where there is a little bit of pushback on this favourite because of the circumstances of last start?
Yeah, the only way I can see it is if the rails is not your best friend.
Okay, which could happen. All right, that's quite an interesting race, really, because we're dealing with a horse that returned same course and probably the same track conditions as it will turn out. Race 8, we've got a slow race here over 1,600. Good old Jimmy the Bear. The perennial is $3.80, Green Fly at $4.80, Lounge Bar Ruby $5.50, Duke de Sessa $8, Prince of Alina $9, Galaron the only other one considered at $11. And only had rolls to poke forward. How will this be run?
This is the slowest tempo of the day. You can see something funny happening here, especially when we get to this part of the day when maybe leading or the inside's not your best friend and we can get slow tempos, and then you've got this predicted ultra weak tempo. Something may take off. For that, you're probably looking down in the weights where they might pinch something if they're sort of fit and up and running, can handle the conditions. They're probably the ones that you look for a sort of an X factor run. They're all sort of tied in through Moonamek, besides Jimmy the Bear. Greenfly, probably the best of its last two runs. Last start at the 250, you can't believe it's got up and run third from there. And then it was slow to begin the start prior. I can see it potentially getting buried there on a slow tempo. I'm not sure how aggressive Williams is going to be. Lounge Bar Ruby was probably the best last start behind Moonamek, but it hasn't done anything for a long period of time. Nothing to get too excited about at $5. So it brings you back to Jimmy the Bear as the DF. But I really wanted to take this horse on before I even saw a result in that Mildura Cup race because, I've got a lot of time for He's Out Bonneville, but it's one of the weakest animals that's ever touched grass. It needs a very specific setup, and sitting outside lead in a slow tempo and then taking off at the 600 is about as bad race profile as it gets for it. So to still only get beat 2 lengths, and most of it's the damage is done in the last sort of 50 metres from Jimmy the Bear sitting 1-1. I've got question marks on the DF. So where do we go to in this race? At this stage, I'm not really sure. I'm probably looking for pattern and yard, because another thing about this race, most of the horses in the market, I expect this is probably the last run for them for the prep. So there could be a few that are real vulnerable in the yard to look at.
So that does seem like you'll need to avail yourself of the Melbourne Pro Punter Service, which obviously does give early assessments, late assessments, but most especially yard reports 5 minutes out from each race. So you're the man on the spot. We'll be banking on you to deliver, Aaron. So just click that eye in the top right corner, or scroll down below the video, or go to the RacingRant website, and you'll be able to sign up for the Melbourne Pro Punter Service. And if you've not seen it before, which many of you haven't, you will be quite elated at the service you get. And as I say, most critically on Saturday, you'll actually have eyes and ears at Caulfield that will be able to tell you which way to go, whether the yin or yang in this sort of complicated weather-affected program. Race 9 takes us out, and LEU, the leader in the last, is it? It's certainly the favourite in the last, $2.90. Rhapsody Chic at $6.50, the Open at $7.50, sorry, and El Rocco at $11. Does LEU lead? I mean, there's bits of speed around. What are you thinking?
Yeah, I think it has to lead. I think the Open will be a little bit aggressive early and just try and tuck in behind it. But based on how Lane rode it 2 back behind Georgia Get Mad and didn't click it up early enough, because it's quite a tough horse and can sort of sustain an 8-4 and still be pretty strong late. I'd expect he has a bit of a crack, especially being this fit. I forgot Gord wasn't coming on this. I was going to get really stuck into him about all the Victorian runners going up to Sydney and just putting panels on you blokes at the moment.
I know. Even Patchouli Dream, 11th up into Sydney.
Oh, God.
Getting the job done.
We've got a couple in this race. LEU is obviously the starting point. I think it's a very deserved favourite. Can handle any which way the conditions go. And even if the inside's potentially off, well, Lane's not going to crash down the inside, is he? He's going to play sort of 4 to 5 off. Obviously, that 2 runs back, everyone saw sort of what happened, the way he rode it poorly. But I thought the last start win in Sydney, carrying that weight, sitting OSL on a heavy track, it clearly should be favourite. But it's tied in with the Open. And normally that's a knock for most people, but I don't think that's a knock in this scenario, because both horses are completely airborne and then have sort of paired off and proven their form lines in completely different circumstances. The Open 2 back led in that Barrack Hill race. At that part of the day, he absolutely did not want to be in that position, both with lanes, but the wind was right up and you were copying a massive headwind from that starting point. And then last start at Sandown, I don't know, a few people said it was a good ride by Tom Preble. I think the Open picked Preble up and carried him to the line. I don't think it was a good ride at all, and I don't think he helped its chances. The horse just had that much ability on them and settled much further back due to where it drew on the day. I think those two horses are clearly a starting point. You know, at $3 and $8, I'm tempted to just bracket the two. I don't think that
Rhapsody Chic did win a particularly weak Sydney race. Everything fell down in front of it.
And it was Randwick as well. Randwick, Flemington, Rosehill, Caulfield tends to be the sort of, you compare the two. And yeah, I agree. I think that was a really weak race. And you go back through what Rhapsody Chic was coming through prior to that run when it was actually going up in grade in Sydney. They're just nowhere near what the Open and LEU are coming through. The one outside the market, $11, is El Rocco. If it's worse than a 6 on the day, you give it a huge chance. If it's a 6 or better, you get your pen out and you just mark straight through the horse. But I wouldn't be looking outside those.
Yeah. Okay. GK, did you have anything to add to the quaddy legs there at Melbourne?
Well, I just thought pricing recommendation is kind of one of the key aspects of the day, like trying to work out what you're factoring in there. So, I mean, for me personally, and factoring in the bias on that day, like I was personally thinking that $1.70 was a fair price for recommendation there, but like that's with my bookie hat on. I think if you can get the price right there, you can probably still do well on the day. And, that's probably going to determine a lot of multi-legs as well as, how hard people go in the rest of the races throughout the day. So, that was a race I was just interested in from a pricing perspective, trying to work that one out because it is a bit of a riddle, I think, trying to factor that in. And then beyond that, those other races, they look like Aaron Yard late male type races to me. They're not races to play in early.
Fair enough. Are there races to play in early at Doomben?
There's a couple. It's not our strongest meeting, that's for sure. Like this is really, the leftovers and the lower grade races after the carnivals ended, and the show has well and truly moved on by this point. So we're still probably a month away even from some of our better horses coming back before they...
This is the quiet time, is what you're saying.
It's the quiet time.
All right, but we will get a full meeting at least in Doomben.
Well, it depends. Maybe there'll be some signage up about 200 metres away or something like that. Hopefully not.
Yeah, so the weather is set fair. As I mentioned at the top of the show, they've even got the watering can out. What are you anticipating from Doomben on Saturday?
Well, I found it amazing that they've put 14 mils on the track in the last 7 days. Like, I just thought that was just a ridiculous thing to do. Like, the meeting 2 weeks ago here, we were at half a metre rail, and just like they always do up here, they put it up as a 4 on Saturday morning, but it played more like a 5. So there is give in the track. So the fact they've watered it again, I just find that to be bizarre, but we've got the rail at 2.5 now. I think they'll put it up as a 4 on Saturday morning again, and it'll probably play like a 5. In general, I thought the track played pretty well 2 weeks ago. It was pretty fair. It was more or less what we were expecting. They could win from all over. Probably lanes 1 and 2 were a little bit of a disadvantage, but they all got their chance. I'm thinking it's probably going to be pretty similar this time again. Maybe the inside will be less of a disadvantage as it was 2 weeks ago, but in general, I think it's probably going to be a pretty fair track.
Okay, well, the 3 races you've selected to preview for the purposes of this show, I note that 2 of them appear ridiculously slow, and the third one appears ridiculously fast. Correct. The first of the races is race 2. which is a Class 3 set weight Class 3 over a mile, and here Madame Odette is $2.50, Cunnamulla Fella $4.20, More Trouble $5. Chevron heads the others at 10. He's likely to start there because it has no rider in Sydney, and I could only see More Trouble and not a clue who or how as any runners with any speed. Well, how are you expecting them to line up here in the run?
Yeah, look, it's a curious map. I'm expecting changes of tactics. Like I would think More Trouble, just based on its pattern in its last two starts, may potentially go to the lead. Last two starts, it's sat, I think, OSL both times, so it probably takes it up. Not a clue how or who, rather than who or how. I think we'll probably push up, and there's a couple of others that can show some early speed, but yeah, it's a curious race to do, especially with the race that Madame Odette came out of last time, which was a race where originally on paper when we did the race, there looked like there was going to be a lot of tempo, and some of it came out late. There was still tempo, but it was a completely different race shape to what we've got here, which, then you get it two questions about, okay, if we do think that's still the best form line, how do we factor that into our pricing? And I think that's part of the puzzle here, as well as the fact that Madame Odette certainly should have won that race, and it wasn't a good ride by Thornton, and now we get Allman on. So we've kind of got pluses in one direction and negatives in another, and I guess that's part of the magic of doing the prices, and getting the price right there on Madame Odette is going to be important. So. And then it's thinking about what are the other key runners in this race? What's their map going to look like? Personally, I thought that More Trouble is probably the one that gets the best run. It's going to obviously go forward. Cunnamulla Fella, it's interesting map what they're going to do here. There is potential it could push up, but I thought that its form lines probably weren't the strongest. So. Look, we haven't bet early here, but I definitely think Madame Odette is the best horse in the race, but it's got some negatives here map-wise. So, look, it'll be a race that'll probably play late, and wait to hear if there's any changes of tactics.
The gear change on More Trouble is interesting. Like not resuming. Well, I suppose it was sort of resuming. It was off a break there at Caloundra in that Guineas, and had the blinkers on for the first time. They appear to have gone very quickly, and it's the race outside the lead. I see the blinkers are off on Saturday.
Yeah, that was curious. Not sure exactly what the thinking is there. Like, even though it was a heavy track, the performance last start was actually probably close to a career peak. Like, it finished alongside a horse like Safrado, which would, for the most part, lap most of these. It's interesting. I'm not entirely sure why they've done that, especially with the intent they've shown in the last two starts, where since they've decided to push up and either lead, sit OSL, the performances have been much better than previously, I've thought. So, yeah, it's a curious one, but it's certainly a horse of interest in this race.
And
Big
obviously,
jockey change, GK.
What's that, Aaron?
Big jockey change. A. Jones on.
Yeah, I have said on my write-up to the guys this week that Jones is actually on a lot of forces in the market, like a lot of favourites this week, and I've just put in bold that Jones's strike rate at Doomben is 7%.
Hey, caution.
Eagle Farm's 15%, and then you've got other riders like Allman and Maloney who strike at around 20% at Doomben, right? So, it's a big difference. And, as I said to the guys last week, it's something that I factor into my prices. And I have to just add a penalty to horses Jones rides.
Yeah. Can you get to the bottom of that? Is there can you see any
ability?
Reason? Okay. So.
An initiative, right?
So maybe Doomben is less forgiving to riders of lesser ability.
Well, I think Doomben is a track, perhaps a little bit like Canterbury or Warwick Farm, where you need strength, right? Like, you need to be a strong rider, and I think that's a little bit where she might come unstuck compared to a few of the others, where you really need strength at a course like Doomben. And I think, a bit of aggression.
All right, but speaking of strength, I had a look at Golan because he's got a horse in race 1 in Sydney.
Yep.
Does the market still underrate Golan? I see that if I look at his runners over the last 5 years, he's got a profit on turnover of 7%, and that's certainly the case recently as well. What am I missing there?
Look, I think the market certainly gravitates towards his runners, but I think most people up here realize the pattern for him, which is that he's not a first up trainer at all. Like his horses really, it's kind of like traditional where it's third up, we're ready to peak. So third up, fourth up, that's the sweet spot for Golan runners. And maybe the market still overlooks that a little bit, and maybe they overvalue them a little bit first up, and then maybe they don't run to that performance that the market's expecting, and then you get a little bit of value a little bit later into the prep. That could be part of the puzzle there.
Okay, well, the next race for preview is race 5. It's an open, and Flying Trapeze is $2.80, Depot at $4.80, Devastate $5, the Vowels $5.50, Irish Songs $8.50, pretty much sees you out. And poking along, Devastate, Flying Trapeze, Abroy, Pervade. What happens here in terms of the map, and what insight have you got in this race?
Yeah, look, I think this is another race where I think there'll probably be a change of tactics, but I'm expecting them to go forward on Flying Trapeze here, just with that weight and this jockey booking. This is a horse which has shown a bit of versatility, I think, in its runs, especially in Sydney. It might not have led, but it's certainly been forward of midfield. I think they'll do that. There's always a few little tricks that can occur in these small fields in Brisbane. Potentially the Vows might go forward. Irish Songs can potentially push up. Devastate is an interesting one. It comes off a pretty strong race in Rockhampton last start, but it's a very strange track, Rockhampton. Like it's like a 600-meter straight. It's incredible, like that track. So look, I think it will push up, but I am expecting Flying Trapeze to push up as well. I think it'll definitely sit in the first 2 pairs. So, what level of tempo we get there is, a little bit of an unknown. We were on Flying Trapeze last start at, I don't know, it was like 18s or something. And it should have won the race. There was actually just no tempo there. It went back and, really sprouted wings late. I think now with the low draw, we can push up, and I think this was a good bet early. We sniped the early price. Now it's into pretty clear favour. It's probably around its right price now. Devastate's a chance, but I don't know. I'm not so sure about the setup here. Like pretty quick backup from a mile, coming back from Rockhampton. I don't know.
It was obviously given a very good sound out in that trial prior to that. To rev up.
Yeah, for sure. So, look, I think it's got ability. It's one that I think will continue to progress for Golan. It's just another one of these imports that he gets going. The Vows is always a chance in a race like this, and so is Irish Songs. But, look, I think Flying Trapeze was a good bet early, and it's probably into about its right price now. I just think it gets a lot of favours map here and, the shape of this race.
So you don't see it getting back out?
Look, it might. It could. I think it probably depends on whether we see a change of tactics late or anything like that from some of those perhaps drawn outside it. But it just gets so many favors here. It gets the weight. For me, it has the best last run, and we're on the minimum, and we've drawn low in a race with no tempo. Like there's just a lot of ticks here.
It does look well set up, as much as we get a little bit antsy about Gary Portelli down here. All right, now here's the test for you. Race 8 is the 3-year-old fillies race. They're about to turn 4 next week, these girls. Avoni I'm not sure if that's how you pronounce it, is $4.20. Real Rush 5, Grey Zoo is $5.50, and Spiritual Song heads the double figures chances at $10. And I didn't know where to look when I checked the early speed on this race, because they do appear to be 7 leaders. How will they sort themselves out, if you have any clue?
Yeah, like anything goes here. Like I've got 5 leaders, and I've got 7 others who generally like to camp in the first 2 or 3 pairs. So it's the light brigade are off here. So look, just with Doomben and with this type of tempo, like I just do not want to be drawn out wide here, because we just know what happens. Like soon as you are caught 3 deep, 4 deep here at Doomben over this trip, you're just gone, right? So,
especially if they're getting along.
Especially if they're getting along, you're better off to have some ability to stalk the tempo. And, I think that's why there's been really strong early support for Avone. So they went up, I can't remember, $9 or something. We took $7.50 Wednesday night, and now it's into about $4. And, I think that's part of it, that it can actually stalk that speed. But I think if you interrogate the form of Avone a little bit deeper, like, this horse was a couple of lengths off Rothfire in the King of the Mountain at Toowoomba last prep. Like it's got some serious runs on the board here, and we get Orman and we get blinkers on, and they've held this girl back a few times from heavy decks because they want her to try track. To me, it just looks like the obvious in this race. In a very tricky race where luck and running is definitely going to play a role. Like it just seemed the obvious, and I thought it was over the odds early. Grey Zeus is another really interesting runner here. It comes through some really strong races. Last start, it was in that race that Cigar Flick won, which was on Tiara Day.
Did we get to the bottom of the times in that race? There was a lot of discussion around that, wasn't there?
Well, it's held up pretty well, really, that form line. Like the horse that finished second there, Navy on the Highway, was 3 wide the trip pretty much. But that form line, like horses that have been finishing behind Navy on the Highway in its previous starts, have just been coming out and winning for fun. It's like one of the strongest form lines in Queensland right now. So that's held up pretty well. I did think Grey Zeus had its chance in that race, and, it had a few favours. It was sort of just camped in the sweet spot, and it finished off pretty well. It's an interesting map where it gets to here. It's an obvious danger just based on its form line, and we get Maloney, which is, a big tick, but I think the map is going to be interesting here. It could potentially get trapped in behind them, so that's interesting. And then there's just a heap of them that just want to try to get out to the lead, like some up and comers here. So there's like Real Rush, Spiritual Song, who are drawn low, who will definitely try to kick up and lead. Look, I think they probably both have ability. I like both of them on type, but there's just so much tempo here. I can see them paddling at the 100.
It's a stern test, isn't it?
It's a big test, especially for those fillies which are really in like their first prep or have only had 2 or 3 starts. This is probably the acid test for a few of them. So, look, interesting runners. I think they've got ability, but I definitely prefer a few of those that have got a few more runs on the board, especially Avone and then Grey Zeus.
Sounds like you've got a very good position there. Of course, if you do want to line up and take the early prices about some of GK's suggested bets, then you need to be in his channel. And again, there'll be a link to the Brisbane Pro service, which you actually get to try out for nothing for 2 weeks. So you can actually suck it and see for yourself. But you get more than enough service from GK. You'll when you get into the channel, you'll realise just what you've lucked upon, because I am certainly admiring from afar just how much work you do and how focused the service is. So thanks, GK, and we look forward to your final assessments for Doomben. And as I say, if you want to avail yourself of those, and particularly the early bets, then you need to be in his channel. So good luck on Saturday with that card, and hopefully the track holds
doesn't hold any terrors on account of overwatering. Aaron, did you have anything to add about Doomben before we go?
No, not particularly. Just there's some very interesting trainer stats that you might want to look into before taking some prices on Saturday there.
Okay, you happy to leave it at that?
Oh, geez, Gary Cortelli would scare me, to be honest, taking that price. Everyone sort of saw what he was doing 12 months ago. I think GP sort of talked him into form one day.
Yeah.
Even recently, last 50, last 100, he's still losing at 40%.
Well, maybe that's why you will get a better price about flying trapeze later.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, gentlemen. Don't forget to click through and sign up to the Melbourne Pro Putter service and the Bris Pro service. I will see you back here next Thursday to talk about the following weeks, but hopefully Saturday goes well for you. Thanks for coming on.
Good luck, guys.